are trapped in our own concept of time. But many cultures think on a vastly different scale. Science has established that the earliest human remains are about 2.5 million years old. It has shifted our marker back, so that now we are able to conceive of human culture being much, much older. In Indian traditions, and in 30 other cultures, a 26,000-year cycle is accepted. How does that affect the traditional chronology of Egypt, which insists that the pyramids were constructed as recently as 2450 BC? Will this force the issue of rethinking the chronology of ancient Egypt? Every year, authors, scientists, and alternative thinkers come together for the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge. They share ideas about ancient cultures, lost knowledge, and great cycles of time.
I started the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge because I wanted to bring together the bright minds in this whole field of alternative history so we can put this very ancient puzzle back together again.
Geologists, physicists, engineers, and archaeoastronomers discuss the accepted dating of world history.
I'm convinced that there is a misunderstanding about the tenets of Egyptian civilization. And I'm convinced that there is misunderstanding about its datings.
To me as a geologist, it's unquestionable that the chronology has to be redone.
Knowledge of precession and advanced astronomy existed in extremely distant times.
So I think we're looking at a chronology that's far, far older than is accepted.
By integrating recent scientific discoveries in different disciplines, they define a new timeline of our past.
What these were really intended to do, it wasn't so much for the selfish purpose of, for example, boosting up a few individuals. This actually had to do with a much larger global perspective. And that's effectively what the Great Pyramid was. It was basically a device, a generator for, if you will, broadcasting and transmitting throughout the planetary structure a type of field which uplifted the entire humanity. For at least 1,000 years, this structure performed beautifully. My guess is that it probably did a lot to help offset the fall into the Dark Ages. And I think what the pyramids did is that for those individuals that were at least somewhat receptive, it kind of kept that energy polarized into the higher centers.
This is very real, and I think this is very important. It's like great art or great spiritual insight, expansion of consciousness. In a way, there's nothing more important than that.
It couldn't do it forever because eventually Mother Nature is going to win out, and this cycle is part of nature. It's as much a part of the natural world as day and night are. We have the ability to grasp those electromagnetic forces and the more fundamental forces that underlie those to basically prop up humanity for a while using the system. Now the pyramids only have a very direct effect if you're close to them, which is the way it is in this age. You know, if we go stand in the pyramid, we might feel an effect like that. But I suspect thousands of years ago, you didn't have to be near it. I think it was probably a global effect.
What I do find fascinating is that the core of the pyramids, at least at Giza, are made out of one type of limestone. Now, it is the limestone that was closest, but it also happens to be the type that's called dolomite because it's got a high magnesium content. And because of that metal content, that kind of limestone conducts electricity pretty well. And then they chose to sheath the pyramid in the whiter Tura limestone, which, granted, it's whiter and it's prettier and all that, but it also has almost zero magnesium content. and therefore it's a much poorer conductor of electricity. It's closer to a pure calcium carbonate, which is what all limestone is. And pure calcium carbonate conducts electricity much more poorly than dolomite does. It's interesting to me that those outer stones were the ones that they cut so precisely that all these thousands of years later you still can't get a razor blade between them. Because basically what we've got here is we've got a situation with a highly electrically conductive core of those pyramids wrapped in what is effectively a very effective insulator. Why the granite in the passageways, you know? And so of course I'm thinking from an electrical point of view and a physical point of view, is there anything special about granite? And yeah, there is. Granite is slightly radioactive, and it will ionize or electrify the air. It releases radon gas, which is radioactive.
Granite is a transmission stone. It's not dead stone, it's alive.
So you have these sealed shafts with granite linings, and I wonder if it wasn't designed to keep an electrical charge present in those shafts. They were built exactly like, if you will, an insulated wire, only more so because you've got all the charge in the ground that's spread across the base, concentrated all the way up into this tiny spot at the top.
We find similarities in 3 different constructions. The one at Giza here, Valley Temple, and one at Abydos, and another one abroad in England, the Stonehenge. Same material being constructed with, and same way and same technique. But the construction there, it's built in addition to have the water, because it's water bed. It's a huge water bed, and it's still working, still producing water.
In Egypt, you do have a similar situation to England in that you have limestone aquifers under the monuments.
An aquifer is an underground layer of porous, water-bearing rock. Water flows through the aquifers as rainfall, or when rivers and lakes flood, the water drains into them.
And movement of water through limestone or chalk aquifers is known to produce electrical charge by 2 different processes that are self-reinforcing. And I've personally measured this for a week at a stretch at Silbury Hill in England, for example. Right before and after thunderstorms, as the water is sinking into the ground, we measured the increase in ground current, the change in the magnetic field as that happened, etc. And in Egypt, you had the Nile crashing, dropping every year and then flooding again. And that movement of water up and down through the layers of limestone would generate electrical charge. Flowing water generates at least a mild electrical charge, which means it generates an electric current, which means it generates a magnetic field as well. So if you were looking to give an electrical charge, a little boost to, say, a mound or something like that, it makes a lot of sense to have it at a minimum running water. And in fact, at Tiwanaku on the south shore of Lake Titicaca, their biggest monument, the Akapana Pyramid, was terraced in such a way as to have the water come down in waterfalls that alternated outside the pyramid, inside the pyramid. But that kind of falling water generates enough electric charge that one of the common school physics experiments is you can, in your own sink at home, if you can divide the stream of water coming out of your faucet into 2 separate streams, you can take a little LED indicator light and put it between the streams, and it'll generate enough electricity that maybe every 20 seconds or so the light bulb will come on. And then the question is, did some of those layers of limestone run up the Giza plateau? And they did, and they did, come up to the surface underneath where some of the pyramids are located. The idea would be that it would be the rising and falling of the Nile that would produce this electric ground current by moving through the different layers of the limestone aquifer. And when there was a dip, say, in that supply, maybe that's when the ionized air in the granite shafts and galleries could help keep the process going, if you will. I tend to wonder if the electrified shafts might not have been able to act in a similar fashion to your car battery when you come to a stoplight. Normally, your battery is not being used when you're driving your car. The alternator provides all the juice. But when you stop and that alternator is turning very weakly, that's when you want the battery there to keep everything going so your engine doesn't cut out. So you've got this concentration of negative charge from the ground at the peak of the pyramid or mound, and a concentration of positive charge above it. And if those two become strong enough, you can start to get brush discharge, which would mean it would glow, like ball lightning, for example. It's a theory.
Why in the Great Pyramid is there no frescoes, there's nothing, no decorations at all? Now, some people have proposed the idea that the pyramids are actually energy machines. And so I liken this to the fact, like, you wouldn't put a decoration inside your oven.
How can we begin to imagine that the ancients had the capacity of 360 senses? Perhaps a metaphor for the full spectrum senses could be a sphere. Is it possible for us to move beyond our 5 senses today?
Our 5 familiar senses have been evolved by evolution to connect us to the physical and material realm. But we have, I like to think of it as a secret doorway inside our own minds, which can be opened in altered states of consciousness, through which we may project our consciousness into other realms and dimensions, and those then become accessible to us.
Could it be that the ancient Egyptians were accessing supernatural realms through heightened perceptions that came from full spectrum senses?
I've come to the conclusion that it's really impossible to understand ancient Egyptian civilization and ancient Egyptian spirituality and religion until you get to grips with the fact that the priests of that religion were deliberately and in a targeted way cultivating altered states of consciousness in order to access the supernatural realm. They know what shamans all over the world still know today, that in the alert problem-solving state of consciousness that is particularly valued by Western industrial society, you are not going to have supernatural or spiritual experiences of any kind. It doesn't mean that the supernatural and spirit realms are not there, because they are. They're all around us all the time. But our senses cannot tune into them.